Imagine opening your mailbox and finding not one or two, but a whole stack of letters, each stamped with fines that didn't even apply to you. That was the reality for Bryson Keaton, a 52-year-old entrepreneur who thought he'd finally found peace on a few acres of land outside Georgetown, Texas. From the moment he moved in, his neighbors weren't welcoming him. They were preparing for battle. The Homeowners Association fired off notices one after another, $50 here, $100 there, thousands for so-called violations. Before long, the balance had ballooned to $250,000. $250,000 in fines for things as small as the direction his mailbox faced or the gravel in his driveway, even though his property wasn't technically inside their gates. Sitting at his kitchen table, Bryson vented to his longtime friend Marcus Mick Devereaux. "They're treating me like I'm some squatter on my own land," he said, tossing another letter onto the pile. Mick scanned the paperwork and shook his head. "They can't just fine you like this. Your land isn't even under their jurisdiction." But the letters kept coming. The HOA president, Gregory Haskell, carried himself like a Wall Street executive even in a small clubhouse meeting, and his vice president, Elaine Drummond, shuffled papers like a prosecutor preparing charges. They painted Bryson as a rebel who threatened property values, and whispers spread through the neighborhood, at grocery stores, at barbecues, even on morning walks. Some neighbors stared openly. Others avoided him altogether. Bryson wasn't just dealing with fines. He was becoming the outcast of the community. Late one night, frustrated and exhausted, he pored over old property records. Buried deep in the paperwork from a real estate acquisition years earlier, he found the detail he'd forgotten. Through a holding company he controlled, Bryson actually owned the ground beneath the subdivision itself. The million-dollar homes, the lawns, the streets, all of it sat on land that legally tied back to him. He leaned back in his chair, stunned for a moment, then allowed himself a slow smile. The people who thought they were fining him into submission were standing on his property the whole time. At the next HOA meeting, Bryson walked in with quiet confidence, a folder tucked under his arm. When Gregory began reciting the list of violations, Bryson interrupted. "Except my property isn't in your community," he said, sliding the deed across the table. "Your reach ends at your fence line." The room fell silent. Neighbors shifted uneasily, glancing at each other as Elaine scanned the document. Gregory tried to recover, insisting the fines still stood and threatening legal action, but Bryson leaned forward and said calmly, "If you want to waste your time in court, be my guest. I don't answer to this board, not now, not ever." The board doubled down. They spread word that he was delinquent, dragging down property values. In town, Bryson felt the stares and heard the whispers. One homeowner confronted him at a gas station, accusing him of selfishness. Bryson shot back. Selfish is when a group tries to control land they don't even own. But behind closed doors, he was preparing. When the HOA finally delivered their biggest threat, a notice of legal action demanding the full $250,000, Bryson didn't panic. He called Mick and said flatly, "They're taking me to court." Mick laughed in disbelief, but Bryson only replied, "They don't realize the ground they're standing on isn't even theirs." A week later, the clubhouse was packed. Word of the lawsuit had spread, and neighbors filled the rows, buzzing with anticipation. Gregory stood at the head of the room, smiling as if victory was already his. "This board has exercised every option available," he declared. "Mr. Keaton has refused to comply. We have voted unanimously to pursue legal action." A few claps rose from the back, but the mood shifted when Bryson stood. His voice was steady, unshaken. "Let's call this what it is," he said. "You're not protecting property values. You're trying to bully me into submission, and now you're wasting everyone's time and money chasing a lawsuit you cannot win." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even some of his critics sat back uncertain. Gregory's smile faltered, and Elaine whispered sharply in his ear. From the middle row, an older resident raised her hand and asked, "Gregory, are you absolutely sure this lawsuit won't backfire on us?" The room grew tense. Bryson looked around at the faces of his neighbors, some doubtful, some curious, a few quietly supportive. He didn't reveal everything that night, but he knew the truth would come out soon enough in court if nowhere else. For months, the HOA had tried to bury him under letters, fines, and gossip. They counted on his silence. They counted on his compliance. What they didn't count on was that the man they were trying to break down controlled the very ground beneath their feet. Roland cleared his throat and declared with practiced authority, "This board knows exactly what it's doing. We have consulted legal counsel. We are confident in our position." Bryson leaned back, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Confidence," he said evenly, "isn't the same as being right." The meeting dissolved in a storm of voices. Some neighbors stormed out muttering that Bryson was tearing the community apart. Others whispered with unease, unsure of what to believe. Bryson walked into the night with his head high, but he knew this battle had shifted. It was no longer about gossip or fines. The next fight would be decided under the cold lights of a courtroom, where every detail, every scrap of paper, every truth and every lie would matter. When the day came, Bryson buttoned his jacket and turned to his friend Mick, who sat in the gallery for support. "Told you they didn't know the hand I was holding," Bryson said with a grin. Mick shook his head, half amused, half anxious. "You just lit a fire under this whole place." What Bryson didn't expect was how that fire would spread. Courtrooms strip people bare, and that morning in the Williamson County Courthouse would prove it. The HOA arrived first. Flanking their attorney, a sharp-tongued local named Clinton Avery, known for his aggressive tactics. Gregory Haskell and Elaine Drummond took their places at the plaintiff's table, their posture rigid, their eyes burning with the hunger to win. They thought this was their moment to finally put Bryson in his place. Bryson entered with his lawyer, Renee Callahan, a no-nonsense real estate attorney from Austin. Unlike the board, she made no show of it, just set down her files, gave Bryson a calm nod, and whispered, "Stay steady. The facts are ours. Let them dig their own hole." Judge Harold Branning, salt and pepper hair framing a face carved from authority, called the room to order. Clinton launched in, painting Bryson as a defiant property owner thumbing his nose at rules everyone else lived by. He spoke of repeated violations, of fines that had climbed to over $250,000, and of the danger Bryson's refusal posed to the harmony of Georgetown estates. Gregory sat tall, chin high, basking in the rhythm of Clinton's voice. Elaine scribbled notes as though the verdict were already theirs. Then Renee rose. She didn't posture, didn't perform. She placed a single folder on the podium and addressed the judge with quiet precision. "Your Honor, this case is not about fairness. It is about overreach. The plaintiffs have spent months issuing fines against my client for rules that do not apply to him. His land was never annexed into the subdivision. He is not, nor has he ever been, under their jurisdiction. Today we will show that this board has no legal standing to collect a single cent." Murmurs fluttered through the benches. A few residents who had come to watch leaned forward, eyes darting between Bryson and the board. The HOA paraded bylaws and testimony about property values. Gregory thundered about community harmony and shared responsibility. But when Renee's turn came again, she dropped the bombshell. She laid out property deeds and chain of title records, each tracing back to a holding company in which Bryson was the majority shareholder. "The very ground this subdivision sits on," she explained, "is owned by my client. The houses belong to the homeowners, but the land itself traces back to him." The room gasped. Elaine dropped her pen. Gregory's face drained of color. The judge leaned forward. "Are you saying the defendant owns the land beneath the subdivision?" Renee nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Clinton leapt to his feet. "Objection irrelevant." Renee didn't flinch. On the contrary, the HOA cannot find someone outside its jurisdiction, and their authority stops at their fence line. In fact, their entire community sits on land owned by my client. The judge studied the records, silent for a long moment as the room buzzed with whispers. Finally, he said, "At this moment I see no legal basis for the fines levied against Mr. Keaton. I will reserve final judgment until I review every record, but the plaintiff's standing appears seriously challenged." The gavel struck. The room erupted. In the cafeteria afterward, residents clustered at tables, their whispers sharp as knives. Some were furious, some bewildered, some almost amused at the turn of events. Bryson sat with Renee, sipping his coffee calmly while Gregory and Elaine huddled with their attorney across the room. Gregory's jaw was tight. "This changes nothing," he hissed. But Clinton's voice was grim. "It changes everything. If the deed holds up, you've been fining a man illegally for months. Judges don't forgive that." Elaine's voice cracked. "So we lose?" Clinton didn't answer. When court reconvened, word had spread. The gallery was packed with residents and strangers alike, eager to witness the drama. Renee methodically presented survey maps, certified filings, every link in the chain that proved Bryson's quiet ownership of the ground beneath Georgetown Estates. Clinton fought back with fire, insisting Bryson threatened the fabric of community life, but the judge's tone grew sharper each time. Mr. Avery, your argument presumes authority where none may exist. Do you have documentation that proves jurisdiction? Clinton faltered. No, Your Honor. That was all it took. The gavel cracked again. At this point, I see no legal standing for the plaintiff's claims. Gasps swept the courtroom. Gregory sat frozen, his face flushed crimson. Elaine scribbled uselessly, as though words on paper could rewrite what had just unraveled. Bryson buttoned his jacket, caught Gregory's eye, and without speaking sent the message that the fight was over. Outside, Mick joined him. You just pulled the rug out from under the whole neighborhood, he said. Bryson shook his head. Not yet. The judge hasn't ruled final, but the board knows what's coming. The fallout spread like wildfire. Residents confronted Gregory and Elaine on the courthouse steps, demanding answers. Some turned their questions on Bryson, asking if it was true. Did he really own the land beneath their homes, and what did it mean for them? He answered plainly, You own your houses. I don't want them. I don't want your money. I just want this board to stop wielding power it never had. But unease had already taken root. That night he found a jagged handwritten note taped to his mailbox. Leave before you destroy us all. He crumpled it in his fist, his jaw tight. Fear was spreading through the neighborhood, and fear had a way of turning neighbors into enemies. The story refused to stay local. Reporters seized on the courthouse twist. Headlines blared across Texas. HOA fines man $250,000. Turns out he owns their neighborhood. By the end of the week, Bryson's name was everywhere. On television in Austin, Dallas, San Antonio. On YouTube clips with millions of views. On social media where strangers debated his every move. Friends from across the country sent him links. One old buddy messaged, Man, you're a meme now. Half the internet wants to buy you a beer. The other half thinks you're a Bond villain. Bryson sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through headlines that painted him as either a folk hero standing up to corruption or a land baron plotting to control his neighbors' lives. What began as a battle over fines had become something larger, something no one could control. Georgetown Estates wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was the stage for a war between perception and truth, between fear and authority, between the story people wanted to believe and the one written in ink on an old forgotten deed. The internet lit up with arguments once the story went viral. Some called Bryson a defender of property rights, finally standing up to an abusive HOA. Others accused him of greed, warning that owning the land beneath his neighbors' homes gave him dangerous leverage. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Some praised him, some feared him. Mick showed up one evening and tossed his phone onto the table. You've gone viral, brother. People on Reddit are calling you the landlord of Georgetown. Bryson frowned and shook his head. That's not what I want. I never asked to be anyone's landlord. Mick cracked open a soda. Doesn't matter. The internet writes its own version. You're the main character now, whether you like it or not. Inside the neighborhood, tensions boiled over. Neighbors who once exchanged polite waves now argued in driveways. Some defended Bryson, saying the HOA had bullied the wrong man. Others echoed Gregory's warnings, claiming Bryson could use his ownership to hold their homes hostage. Gregory and Elaine scrambled to salvage control. They sent out newsletters calling Bryson manipulative, even arranging an interview for Gregory on local TV. But his stiff delivery and Elaine's nervous shuffling behind him made the clip go viral for all the wrong reasons. Memes mocked them as clueless leaders facing a real-life monopoly board. Meanwhile, Janice Rowland stopped by Bryson's house. She looked exhausted after fielding questions from worried neighbors. They're losing control, she told him. Half the neighborhood feels betrayed by Gregory. The other half is panicking about you. Bryson sighed. All I want is peace. I never asked for this circus. Janice gave him a weary smile. Doesn't matter what you asked for. Everyone knows you're holding the cards now. By the end of the month, national outlets picked up the story. CNN ran a segment. Fox News debated it. TikTok users turned courthouse clips into viral edits with captions, like when the HOA picks the wrong neighbor. Bryson sat one evening, watching a commentator describe him as a symbol of individual rights against collective overreach. He muttered under his breath, "I just wanted a shed." But fame came with pressure. Reporters camped outside his neighborhood. Law firms offered representation. Cars slowed in front of his house, strangers filming as if he were an attraction. Mick watched from the porch one night as headlights crept by. "You're living in a fishbowl now. Everything you do, people will pick apart." Bryson stared into the night and said quietly, "Then I'll give them something worth dissecting. The truth." Back inside Georgetown Estates, the real battle raged. The lawns were still trimmed, the streets lined with SUVs, but the community was fractured. Gregory held emergency HOA meetings almost weekly, insisting they couldn't let one man dictate their future. His speeches about unity and standards fell flat. Homeowners challenged him openly, demanding answers about why the board hid the truth. Victor Landry stood up at one meeting and shouted, "You said you were protecting us. Turns out you dragged us deeper into a mess you created." Murmurs of agreement spread across the room. Gregory's composure cracked. Elaine scribbled notes furiously but never seemed to finish. Bryson kept quiet most of the time, but silence didn't shield him from neighbors. Some came angry, others pleading. One couple knocked on his door, worried for their children's future in the neighborhood. They sat at his table, voices tense. "We just want to know where this ends. Do you control us now?" Bryson shook his head firmly. "No, you own your homes. You live your lives. I'm not here to collect rent or run your community. I just wanted respect. The same respect everyone else gets." The couple exchanged a look, and for the first time, Bryson saw understanding in their eyes. Word of that conversation spread, softening suspicion. More neighbors came to hear his side, and each time he repeated the same line, "I don't want your houses. I want fairness." As residents began shifting toward Bryson's view, Gregory's grip weakened. Homeowners stopped paying fees. Attendance at HOA meetings dropped. Janice, once the mediator, stood up during one meeting and said, "Maybe the real lesson is that authority only exists if we let it." We trusted too much without asking questions, and when that power was abused, it took Bryson to show us. The room fell quiet. Even those who still distrusted him had no response. Months later, the court delivered its final ruling. Judge Branning confirmed what many already suspected. The HOA had no legal standing to fine Bryson. The $250,000 debt vanished. Gregory resigned quietly. Elaine disappeared soon after. The HOA remained on paper, but its influence was a shadow of what it had been. Homeowners tossed newsletters into the trash without a glance. For Bryson, victory felt less like triumph and more like survival. He returned to his routines, mowing his lawn, finishing his shed, sipping coffee on his porch. Some neighbors waved again, hesitant but rebuilding trust. Others avoided him, ashamed they'd believed the worst. Janice stopped by with peach cobbler one evening. "Peace offering," she said with a smile. Bryson chuckled. "I'll take cobbler over court papers any day." Janice grew serious. "You reminded us that power only works if no one questions it." Bryson nodded. "That's all I wanted people to see. Not that I own the land. That we gave power to people without ever asking if they deserved it." Later, Mick asked if Bryson ever wished it had gone differently. Bryson leaned back in his chair. "I wish it hadn't happened at all. But if it had to, I'm glad the truth came out. I'd rather live with honesty than comfort built on lies." The story of Georgetown Estates eventually faded from headlines, but the lesson lingered. Some neighbors left, others stayed to rebuild. Bryson never used his ownership as leverage. He didn't raise rents, didn't threaten, didn't flex his power. He simply proved that standing firm mattered, even when the odds or the paperwork were stacked against you. The message was clear. Don't hand over your freedom without asking questions. Don't assume authority has your best interest at heart just because it says so. For Georgetown Estates, it was a hard-earned truth. For anyone watching from outside, it was a warning. Authority only carries weight if it goes unchallenged.